So we all know that reducing the amount of contact you have with the paintwork on your car is a good way to reduce the risk of scratches and swirl marks. We also know that probably one of the most irritating things is when you've washed and dried your car and it looks good, and then suddenly you notice a load of drip marks down from the mirrors and the headlights and things like that. So I've got this here with me, which is the BLO Air-RS Car Dryer, and this aims to address both the points I've just mentioned. So in this video I'm going to be trying to address as many questions as I can about car dryers in general and this specific model. So you first have the switch on the top, which has 3 positions. So the neutral flat position is when it's off. It also has a fan and then a sun and a fan, and the difference between the two is that the one with the sun is going to heat up the air. It's also worth noting that the US and the UK versions of these are different. Having looked at the US version, it doesn't actually have that separate function for the heated and the cooled air. I think it is just heated on that model, but just make sure you check wherever you buy it from. So it also has the dial, which just controls the level of wind speed. When you first turn it on, it's recommended to have this on the lowest settings to help preserve the life of the motor, and then when you switch it on, you can of course turn that up, and that's when you'll notice that the hose actually expands to its full length. So you get 2 nozzles that you can choose from here. So there is the fan type one and then the more of the jet one. I generally just stick to the jet one as I find that it easily clears large panels, and the fan one doesn't give me too much of an advantage. I also feel like the jet one is better for more intricate areas such as the mirrors and headlights and things like that, but of course you can experiment and see which one works best for you. The machine itself takes no time to set up out of the box. The mechanism by which the hose connects to the machine and the nozzles connect to the hose is a sort of twist and click mechanism, which does feel very secure, so I do like that aspect of it. As you can see, despite not being the most powerful model in the range, this does clear water off a well protected car very easily. So the speed is 43,500 feet per minute. In general, I do use the max setting for most of the vehicle. The only time that I find it beneficial to turn the wind speed down a little bit is around more intricate areas such as the mirrors, as it actually makes it a little bit easier to dry these areas when the air isn't flowing quite as quickly. So the hose on this model is 5 meters, so slightly less than the more expensive GT model. So it also has a 5 meter mains cable as well. The tips of the nozzles are made of rubber, and this is to prevent scratching of the vehicle if you do actually end up touching the paintwork. However, despite being softer than hard plastic, they really aren't that soft, and if you do end up touching the paintwork with them, then you are very likely to mar it still. So unlike the more expensive GT model, this one does not have wheels. It's not a problem for me because, as you can see, I've got stone driveway anyway, so wheels really wouldn't cope with this. And I also feel like it's not that much of an issue to actually move the machine around. Being so light, you're probably only going to have to do it once or twice throughout the process. Like most dedicated car dryers, this has a filter on the back, so the aim of this is to stop any debris going into the machine and of course flying out onto your paintwork. The filter itself is very easy to change and clean, so you can just sort of clip it off the back and remove this sort of foam filter and clean it. Just using sort of warm soap and water is what's recommended. Leave it to dry and then you can just pop it back in. One of the main issues that people have with car dryers is that it does take longer to actually dry the vehicle compared to using a towel. So what I've got here is a sped up clip of me drying the entire vehicle just using the dryer. So the full process took me just under 10 minutes to complete, so although this did take me over double the time it normally would to dry the car, there was no issues with any drips afterwards, and I also was going for absolute perfection without the towel. If you are prepared to use a towel on some of the areas just to dab a couple of spots, then you would save yourself a lot of time. Also, if you did use a towel on the window, that'd shave some time off as well. Whether or not the time it takes to use this method is worth it or not is of course up to you. For me, it really doesn't bother me because I do like spending time outside cleaning my car. Having said that, my car is pretty small, so for a typical size vehicle it is definitely going to take longer. So one thing I did wonder when I was looking at car dryers was how much protection does the vehicle actually need to have? So what I'm going to do is show you the dryer in action on a car where I keep hitting the protection with the Garage Therapy Decon shampoo to dull the wash behaviour, so you can see at what point it starts to become ineffective. So here you can see the initial water behaviour with a pressure washer, and there's quite a lot of sheeting and bead in here, so the dryer had no issues on a panel like this. After a hit with the decontamination shampoo, you can see the water behaviour is dulled, but it's definitely not dead. And the dryer again didn't have any issues clearing a panel like this. Slightly slower, but not too much difference. Now the water behaviour is pretty dead. There's some slow sheeting and the beads aren't particularly uniform at all. But again, the dryer still managed to clear the panel. It became a little bit sticky on some areas where the water behaviour was much flatter, but it is still possible using this method, just not particularly efficient. And here you can see when the water was completely flat, there was some very, very slow sheeting, but it did take the panel a long time to actually show any water behaviour. And you can see under these conditions, the dryer does struggle. The water is very, very sticky to the panel at this point, but it does still manage, even on the cold setting, to evaporate the water still. So it is possible, but it's not something that I would really want to be doing. And with this kind of water behaviour, I definitely would be using a towel. I also did want to address the pros and cons of this particular model. Now, starting with the advantages, I'd say that this model, despite not being top of the range, is actually more than enough to dry my car, and I don't feel like I need something more powerful. So if you are just an enthusiast like me, I really don't think that you need to look at the GT model if you do want to save a bit of cash. It's also really easy to operate with just having these two main controls. It does give you plenty of variability, but without overcomplicating things. Now, I think the hose length on this model, so the 5 meters, is enough. It could do with being slightly longer, and with the more expensive model you do get an 8-meter one, which I do think would make the device a little bit more convenient. However, it does have the added benefit that it's not too hard to actually store. The obvious disadvantage with car dryers in general is that they do take longer to dry the car, and also they are incredibly loud. So what I'm going to do now is show you a clip of it with the volume on. Now, of course, the actual volume is going to depend on how loud your speakers are, but just so you can hear it a little bit more and what it actually sounds like. The machine itself really isn't actually that loud. It's when you hit the panel and particular areas like the mirrors and things like that, it is very high pitched, and I definitely recommend wearing some kind of headphones or ear protection because it does get incredibly loud. So there are a lot of alternatives on the market to using a car dryer and to using this model specifically. So the reason that I bought this one over some other models is because I felt like the power was enough to be able to dry my car, and I'm happy to say that it was. I also think that this model is very well priced for the specs it has. So when I looked at the Big Boy Mini, which is in this price range as well, the feet per minute specification just wasn't as high. So this is why I went for this one over that. I also considered getting a leaf blower, and this is something that I have used in the past. The reason I didn't go for that option is because I find them a little bit awkward to use. I prefer using a hose to actually dry the car. It makes life a lot easier, and me being quite small, it allowed me to dry the car without reaching too much and just being generally a little bit awkward. And another alternative that people do use is a pet dryer. Now, I did look at these quite in depth. The reasons that I didn't go for one are primarily that, one, the hose tends to be shorter. On most models I saw it was 3 meters, which, as I said, I don't think is enough to dry a car conveniently. Also, the pet dryers that I could see were significantly less powerful than this model, so I could see specs of around sort of 12,000 feet per minute for a pet dryer, and compared to the 43,500 for this, it is significantly less powerful. So I will pop a link in the description to where I bought this model. If you have enjoyed the video, it'd be brilliant if you could drop it a like. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.